Cornelius Oswald Fudge had come to Hogwarts with the fixed smile of a man attending a ceremony he did not approve of and could not cancel. It was a smile that belonged on a balcony, beneath bunting, while schoolchildren waved little flags. It did not belong beneath whitewashed rafters and the sour, sweet tang of potions, with the air thickened by grief. He stopped at the foot of the nearest bed, as if an unseen cord had tightened around his middle. The boy on the bed beyond had been handsome in the ministry photographs, a champion's grin, broad shoulders under school robes. The boy here looked suddenly too small for his own bones, the sheet tucked around him with the careful cruelty of hospital neatness. Cedric Diggory's father stood somewhere behind, making a sound Fudge could not shape into words, and Fudge did not turn because he had no expression ready for that sound. He turned instead to the living. Harry James Potter sat propped against pillows, his hair as untamable as ever, his face drawn tight over the edges of a child that grief had started to sharpen into something older. There was dried mud in the creases of his knuckles. His right arm lay bound in white linen, the bandage bright against the bruise dark on his skin. His eyes, green as the minister's own office plants, were too awake. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore stood at Harry's bedside as though he had put himself there by choice, and would remain regardless of any authority that pushed against him. His half-moon spectacles caught the candlelight. Behind them, his gaze was level, unflinching. "The Triwizard Cup," Fudge said, because it was easier to begin with objects than with horrors. His voice, usually a practiced croon, came out flat. "Porky, that's what you're saying." "That is what happened," Dumbledore replied. Fudge's hands had already found his pockets, fingers worrying the seam like a boy about to be scolded. "Porkies are regulated. Strictly regulated. One does not simply—" "Someone did," Minerva McGonagall said, and for a moment the Highland edge in her voice cut through the room's softness. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her mouth a thin line. "And someone killed Cedric." Fudge's gaze slid back to the still form on the bed as if compelled. "A tragic accident," he started, because he had said those words 1,000 times in 1,000 different scandals. Accidents were manageable. Accidents were paperwork. Harry spoke, and the room changed. "It wasn't an accident," Harry James Potter said. He did not raise his voice. "That was the worst part. He told me to bow. He made me watch. He came back." Fudge looked at the boy and tried to find the crack where exaggeration could seep in. The scar on Harry's forehead looked livid, as if the skin itself had remembered fire. "You're saying—" Fudge began, and his tongue stumbled over the name like it had teeth. "You're saying you know who." Severus Snape moved then, a slight shift. A man stepping out of shadow without ever seeming to have been fully in it. His black robes made him look carved from a knight that had learned to walk. He held out his left forearm. The skin there was marked. The dark mark lay on Snape's pale flesh like a bruise shaped into a skull. It was not the faded tattoo of a misbegotten youth. It looked alive, as though it could crawl. Fudge's breath caught. In the fluorescent-lit corridors of the ministry, marks and scars were usually stories. He said, she said, memories blurred by time. Here, under candlelight, the mark seemed to drink the air. "It burned," Severus Snape said, voice low. "Tonight." Fudge stared as if his eyes could refuse to understand. He had seen the dark mark once before, years ago, when his predecessor had insisted on touring Azkaban. It had been on the arm of a man sobbing into his own sleeve, swearing he had been forced, swearing he had repented, swearing anything at all to make the cold stop biting through his bones. Fudge had filed that memory away under the heading unpleasant and decided to never take it out again. Dumbledore's voice was gentle, which made it more terrifying. "Cornelius," he said, "I ask you to be brave." Brave. The word had no business in a hospital wing. Brave belonged on banners and in children's books, where dragons were only ink. Fudge swallowed. The taste was metallic. "Where is the man who did this?" he managed. "Under guard," Dumbledore said. Harry's fingers clenched on the blanket. "He's here," he said. He was moody. Madame Pomfrey made a sound of disgust, as if betrayal were a wound she could not dress. Fudge felt the room narrowing toward a point, toward a decision he had avoided for 13 years by letting others make it for him. If he believed this, if he truly believed this, then there was no returning to the old routines. No smiling speeches. No quietly burying bad news beneath holiday stories and Quidditch scores. Cedric Diggory lay still as proof that the world had already changed without the minister's permission. "All right," Cornelius Fudge said, and his own voice startled him, as if someone else had spoken through his mouth. "All right, take me to him. Now." They took him down corridors that seemed suddenly less like school hallways and more like the veins of a fortress. Hogwarts had always been ancient. Tonight the stone felt older, harder, less forgiving. Portraits muttered as they passed. A fat monk in a frame stared with open worry. Somewhere behind a door, Peeves cackled, and the sound made Fudge's skin crawl, because it did not belong in a world where boys died. The classroom door was guarded by 2 Aurors Fudge recognized, his own men, summoned quickly enough that it felt like fate. Their dark cloaks were damp at the hem, rain dragged in from the grounds. Their faces were strained with the strange expression of professionals who have trained for years for one emergency and then find themselves in another entirely. Dumbledore did not look at the Aurors for permission. He opened the door as if it were his by right, which, in this place, it was. Inside, the air stank of stale polyjuice potion and panic sweat. A chair sat in the center of the room like an altar. Artemius Crouch Jr. was tied to it, his wrists bound, his head lolling. His hair had been hacked short, his face still not settled back into itself after the potion's deceit. Even without the borrowed features, there was something rat-like in him. Eyes too quick, mouth too thin. A man shaped by obsession. On a table nearby sat a flask. An ordinary ugly thing, the kind you might find in a laborer's kit. The magical eye, blue and swiveling, glared from it like a trapped spirit. Fudge's stomach turned. "Merlin," he whispered. Artemius Crouch Jr. lifted his head and smiled, as if he were at a dinner party. "Minister," he said, voice hoarse but delighted. "How charming of you to come." Fudge flinched at the familiarity. "You murdered that boy," he said, and his voice, unexpectedly, held steel. The sight of Cedric Diggory had done something to him. It had stripped away the softness that came from living mostly among papers. "I did what I was told," Crouch Jr. said. His eyes flicked to Dumbledore with hatred sharp enough to be felt. "I served my master." Dumbledore moved closer, his steps quiet. "Barty," he said, and there was sorrow in the name, as if he mourned not only the dead but the wasted. "You will tell the truth." Crouch Jr. laughed. "Truth," he echoed, as though it were a joke. "Oh, I'm full of truths, Professor. You never listened." Fudge's instinct, honed by years of wrangling scandal into neat shapes, surged up. Get control of the narrative. Decide which truths could be tolerated. Decide which could be buried. But there was Dumbledore beside him like a mountain in old robes, and there was Snape behind like a blade held low. Snape moved slightly, and Fudge's eyes caught on the man's left forearm as the sleeve shifted back. The mark was there, dark, stark, awake. "It burned," Snape said curtly. "Tonight, dort de." Crouch Jr.'s grin widened. "Oh yes," he breathed. "He's risen, Minister. He's risen and he's calling us home. He'll punish the ones who hid. He'll reward the faithful." Fudge's mouth went dry. "Where?" he forced out. "Where is he now?" Crouch Jr. leaned back as far as the ropes allowed, savoring the moment. "Safe," he said softly. "Planning, gathering. You can't stop him. You couldn't stop him the first time." Fudge's eyes flicked to Dumbledore, as if begging the older wizard to laugh it off. Dumbledore did not. "What do you want, Albus?" Fudge demanded, voice cracking, anger surging to cover fear. You want me to declare it? To tell the public that he's back? There will be chaos. There will be chaos regardless, Dumbledore said quietly. But we can choose whether we face it with open eyes. Harry's voice came from the doorway, thin and steady. He's back, Harry said. You know it now. Crouch Jr.'s eyes snapped to Harry, and the delight in them turned savage. He's marked, he hissed. My master has his blood. He'll have his life. Harry did not flinch. He only stared at Fudge, forcing the decision. Fudge's hands trembled. He curled them into fists and forced them still. He looked at the Aurors. Take him, Cornelius Fudge said, voice tight. Alive. No Dementors near him. Do you hear me? Alive. He'll be questioned under my authority. One of the Aurors blinked, as if he had expected the opposite order. Then he nodded sharply. Yes, Minister. Crouch Jr. laughed again, but there was something frantic now under the amusement, as though the world had shifted in a way even he had not anticipated. Dumbledore's gaze held Fudge's. That, Dumbledore said, was bravery. Fudge did not feel brave. He felt as if he had stepped onto a bridge and discovered the river below was not water but fire. The Ministry of Magic at night felt like a cathedral built for secrecy. The atrium's golden statues gleamed with an uncaring shine, the witch and wizard raising their wands high, as if that alone could keep the dark away. Fudge normally liked the statues. They made him feel like he belonged to a grand tradition. Tonight, they looked like liars. Footsteps echoed too loudly. The flue fireplaces hissed with green flame, spitting out Aurors, clerks, messengers, each one carrying the scent of cold rain and alarm. Somewhere above, a quill scratched across parchment with frantic speed. Fudge's own office lights blazed like a beacon, and for once he hated being so easy to find. Amelia Bones waited inside the emergency conference room, hands clasped behind her back. Her hair was drawn tight, her expression carved from iron. She had always intimidated Fudge in a way he would never admit. She cared too much about law to care properly about politics. Rufus Scrimgeour stood beside her, broad-shouldered, his face lined by years of chasing people who did not wish to be caught. In better days, Fudge might have found Scrimgeour's presence reassuring, a man who looked like he could wrestle trouble into the ground. Tonight, even Scrimgeour looked as if he wished for a bigger room and more men. Kingsley Shacklebolt leaned against the wall like a shadow given height. His eyes followed Fudge with a calm that felt like judgment, though his face remained politely neutral. Fudge tossed his bowler hat onto the table and ran a hand over his hair. It came away damp. Right, he said, forcing briskness into his voice the way one might force a door shut against wind. We proceed as though it's true, because it is true. Amelia Bones' eyebrow twitched. You have confirmed? She asked. Fudge's jaw clenched. Albus Dumbledore confirmed, he said. Severus Snape confirmed. Bartemius Crouch Jr. confirmed, under guard, not kissed. He described a ritual. He named his master without hesitation. Fudge's mouth dried. Voldemort is alive. The name fell like a stone into a pond. No ripples, just the sudden sense that the water beneath had been disturbed. Scrimgeour's eyes narrowed. We move now, he said. It was not a suggestion. We bring in every Auror, every hit wizard, every member of the improper use of magic office who can be useful. We secure Azkaban. We secure the Floo network. We start surveillance on known sympathizers. The Wisengamot will have to be informed, Amelia Bones said. This cannot remain. I know, Fudge snapped, then flinched at his own sharpness. He pressed his palm to the table and breathed. I know, but we do it in order. We do it properly. No panic, no hysteria. Kingsley's voice was smooth. Hysteria is what happens when people feel lied to, he said quietly. Fudge's throat tightened. Then we don't lie, he said, and the words felt strange on his tongue, as if he were speaking an unfamiliar language. Not about this. He looked down at the parchments spread out. Names. Addresses. Old case files reopened, dust shaken off like ash. Lucius Malfoy's name sat there like a fat spider. "I want immediate warrants prepared for the seizure of dark artifacts," Fudge said. "We start with Malfoy Manor, but carefully. If we storm in like idiots, we'll spook half of them into running straight to him." Scrimgeour gave a slow nod. "We can put a tail on Malfoy," he said. "We can put tails on all of them. The trouble is, Minister, there are a lot of them." "There are more," Amelia Bones said softly. "If the Imperious defense was as popular as they claimed." Fudge felt bile rise. He had accepted so many Imperious defenses because they were convenient, because they allowed the Ministry to be seen as merciful, because they kept the wealthy cooperative. Now the mercy curdled into a weapon. "Then we'll find out," Fudge said. He looked at Kingsley. "You," he said, and Kingsley's gaze sharpened. "You're to liaise with Dumbledore, officially, discreetly. Whatever he needs, he tells you. You tell me." Kingsley's lips curved in the barest hint of approval. "Yes, Minister." "And I want a statement drafted," Fudge continued, voice tightening again. "For the Prophet. A careful one. We don't say Voldemort in the headline like we're selling sweets. We say there is evidence of renewed dark activity. We say the Ministry is acting." Scrimgeour's eyes glinted. "And if the Prophet refuses?" Fudge met his gaze. For years he had courted the Daily Prophet like a lover, feeding it stories, smoothing its ruffled feathers. He had always thought of it as his friend. "Then it won't be the Prophet anymore," Fudge said, and surprised himself by meaning it. Amelia Bones took a step closer. "Cornelius," she said, and the use of his first name made it intimate, dangerous. "Are you prepared for what this means? There will be pressure. There will be fear. Your supporters." "My supporters can line up behind me or they can get out of my way," Fudge said, and his voice shook. He steadied it with effort. "Cedric Diggory is dead. That's what it means." For a moment, the room fell silent. In that silence, Fudge felt the old instinct to run, to find some corner where he could fold this horror into manageable pieces. But there was nowhere to run. Not now. "Good," Scrimgeour said, voice low. "Then we begin." Albus Dumbledore had always made his office feel like a place where oddness could be safe. There were curious instruments that whirred and sighed, a shelf of eccentric books, a phoenix whose feathers looked like embers. Tonight, the oddness felt less like whimsy and more like warning, as if the world's secrets had been stored here too long and were beginning to leak. Minerva McGonagall sat very straight in a chair that did not deserve her posture. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her fingers were white at the knuckles. Severus Snape stood by the window, staring into the rain with the expression of a man listening for footsteps behind him. Alistair Moody paced the rug like a caged animal, his magical eye rolling, scanning corners, scanning shadows, scanning possibilities. Remus John Lupin stood near the bookcase, shoulders slightly hunched, as if expecting a blow. He looked older than he had the year before, his face drawn, his eyes tired but alert. He met Dumbledore's gaze and nodded once, a silent understanding between them. The fireplace roared suddenly, green flame flaring. Kingsley Shacklebolt stepped out with the smoothness of a man born to move through thresholds. He brushed soot from his sleeve, then inclined his head to Dumbledore. "The minister has decided," Kingsley said, voice low. "He believes. He's mobilizing." Moody barked a laugh that was more teeth than humor. "About time," he growled. Minerva let out a breath she had been holding so long it seemed to have become part of her bones. "Thank God," she murmured, then lifted her chin. "What happens now?" Dumbledore turned to his desk. On it lay a map of Britain, parchment pinned by small weights shaped like animals. There were marks on it already, tiny dots in ink, lines drawn like veins. "We act," Dumbledore said simply. He did not sound triumphant. He sounded tired and resolved. "The enemy has lost the advantage of our denial. That does not mean he is weak. It means he will change his plan. Snape's voice came from the window like a knife sliding from a sheath. He will suspect spies, Severus Snape said. He will seek to tighten his circle. He will punish those who did not answer his call quickly enough. Nay, until I know. Moody stopped pacing. Let him, he snarled. Better he waste time carving up his own than carving up ours. Lupin's gaze flicked to Moody. If he wastes time, Remus Lupin said quietly. Voldemort isn't known for waste. The phoenix, Fawkes, let out a soft, mournful trill. Dumbledore's eyes softened briefly, then hardened again. Severus, he said, and Snape turned. You must return to him. Minerva's head snapped up. Albus. Minerva, Dumbledore said gently, and the word carried the weight of years. We need eyes and ears where we cannot go. Severus has, he paused, as if tasting how much truth to give, a path back that no one else has. Snape's mouth twisted. I go, he said, as if the agreement had been made long ago. His dark eyes flicked toward Kingsley. The Ministry knows? They know you are useful, Kingsley said diplomatically. Snape's laugh was silent. Useful, he echoed, and there was contempt in the word, though it might have been aimed at himself. Moody's magical eye swung toward Kingsley. And what about the Order? He demanded. We doing this proper, Dumbledore? Or are we skulking like last time, whispering in dark corners while the Ministry plays politics? Nay, nah. Kingsley lifted his chin. The Minister will not disband you, he said. He's prepared to acknowledge cooperation, quietly, at first. Minerva's expression tightened. Quietly, she repeated, and the word carried bitter memory. Dumbledore's gaze rested on her, apologetic. We cannot erase what has been done, he said, but we can choose what to do now. He tapped the map. There are immediate priorities, he continued. Protection for those most at risk. Intelligence on Voldemort's movements. And his finger hovered over a dot labeled with a name. The matter of Peter Pettigrew. Lupin's face went still. Moody's jaw clenched. Pettigrew is alive, Dumbledore said. If we can find him, we can accomplish two things at once. We can confirm to the wider world that Voldemort has reclaimed his servant, and we can free Sirius Black. Minerva's eyes widened, and for the first time since the hospital wing, something like hope flickered in them. Sirius, she whispered, as if the name were a candle she did not dare blow on too hard. Kingsley's gaze sharpened. If we can bring Pettigrew in, he said, Amelia Bones will have no choice. The case will be reopened. Azkaban won't be able to hold him on lies. Moody grunted. And Pettigrew? He said. He'll squeal. He will, Dumbledore agreed. And that will be another stone in the wall we must build quickly. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the old men in portraits leaned forward in their frames, listening, faces tight with their own remembered wars. Dumbledore looked at each of them, as if counting the living and weighing what he could afford to lose. We begin tonight, he said, and we do not wait for permission from fear. The Hogwarts Express felt wrong without the usual rush of relief. Students still filed into compartments, still dragged trunks and cage bars in the small bright hope of summer home. But the laughter was thin, snapped quickly into silence when anyone's eyes drifted to the black-draped compartment at the front where Cedric Diggory's body had been placed for the journey. Harry James Potter sat with Ronald Bilious Wesley and Hermione Jean Granger in their compartment, and none of them seemed to know what to do with their hands. Hermione's fingers worried the edge of her sleeve. Ron's foot tapped, stopped, tapped again. Harry stared at the rain sliding down the glass as though he might see a graveyard in the drops. Are you sure? Ron asked for what must have been the 10th time, his voice low. About the minister, I mean. Harry blinked. He saw, he said. The memory of Fudge's face in the hospital wing was sharp, the way the man's confidence had drained out like water. the way his eyes had stuck to the dark mark on Snape's arm. He saw Cedric. He saw Crouch. He believed. Hermione's eyes were bright and fierce. "Good," she said, as though she could force goodness into existence by saying the word hard enough. "Good. He has to. It changes everything." "It doesn't bring Cedric back," Ron muttered, and then looked guilty, as if he had accused Hermione of murder. Hermione's mouth softened. "No," she said quietly. "It doesn't." Outside their compartment, footsteps sounded. Harry's shoulder tightened instinctively. Then a voice murmured to someone in the corridor. Calm, professional, unfamiliar. Hermione leaned to peer out the window of the compartment door. "There's an aura," she whispered. Harry's stomach lurched. The Ministry had always felt far away, a thing of marble halls and parchment, but now it had stepped onto the train like a shadow. He stood and slid the compartment door open. A tall man in dark robes stood in the narrow corridor, wand holstered but hand resting near it. He had the wary eyes of someone who had learned that danger did not always come with a trumpet. "Harry James Potter?" the Auror asked. Harry stiffened at the full name. "Yes." The Auror nodded once. "Orders from the Minister," he said, and his voice held an edge of disbelief, as though he still couldn't quite imagine the Minister giving sensible orders. "You will be escorted to your relative's house. There will be protection stationed nearby. You are not to leave without notifying the Ministry contact assigned to your area." Ron's face went pale. "Protection?" he repeated. "At Privet Drive?" The Auror's eyes flicked over Ron as if assessing threat level. "That's right," he said. "There will be watchers. No one is to approach the boy without being noticed." Hermione's brows knitted. "Will there be Dementors?" she asked sharply. The Auror's mouth tightened. "No," he said. "There will be no Dementors deployed in Surrey. Not unless the Minister orders otherwise." He paused. "And he won't, if he has any sense." Harry's throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me?" he asked. "Because you have a habit of being left out of plans that involve you," the Auror said, and there was a faint dryness to his tone. "And because the Minister doesn't want you attacked on his watch. Not again." Harry's skin prickled. Not again. As if he had already been attacked under the Ministry's indifferent gaze. As if the Ministry had already failed him once, and noticed only because a corpse had been dragged into the light. "Who are you?" Hermione asked. The Auror's eyes flicked to her, and a hint of respect warmed them. "Dawlish," he said. "John Dawlish. You'll have Kingsley Shacklebolt's name as a contact, but I'm on this rotation." Ron whistled under his breath. "Kingsley Shacklebolt," he murmured to Harry, eyes wide. "Bill says he's proper." Hermione nodded quickly. "He's in the order," she whispered, then bit her lip, as if realizing she had spoken too loud. Dawlish didn't react. If he heard, he gave no sign. "Keep your head down," he told Harry. And there was something almost human in the advice. Something that sounded like concern. "Keep your friends close, and if anything feels wrong, you send word, immediately." Harry nodded, and the Auror moved on, his cloak brushing the compartment doors like dark water. Harry slid back into the compartment. Ron stared at him as if Harry had grown a second head. Hermione's hands were clasped tight in her lap, knuckles white. "Well," Ron said, forcing a shaky grin. "At least now the Ministry's pretending you're important." Harry didn't smile. He looked at his bandaged arm, at the place where Voldemort's resurrecting spell had burned through him. He thought of the graveyard, of bone and blood, of the cold voice saying, "Kill the spare." "I'm important," Harry said quietly. To him, the train rattled on through rain-dark countryside, carrying children home while war crept alongside the tracks. Privet Drive had never looked like a battlefield, but Harry James Potter saw it that way now. The neat lawns, the identical houses, the trimmed hedges, all of it felt like camouflage over something rotten. The sky hung low, bruised with clouds. The street lamps blinked on as he stepped off the taxi and hauled his trunk up the path. Hedwig shifted restlessly in her cage, feathers fluffed with displeasure. The air smelled of wet asphalt and cut grass, sharp and ordinary. It made Harry want to scream. The front door opened before he could knock. Petunia Dursley stood there, her lips pinched, her eyes darting past him as if expecting someone to leap from behind the hydrangeas. "You're late," she snapped automatically, and then seemed to realize the absurdity of the complaint. Her gaze landed on his bandage. "What's that?" "Nothing," Harry said, because explaining would be like pouring poison into a cup and asking her to drink. He pushed past her with his trunk. Vernon Dursley loomed in the hallway like an overgrown guard dog. "What have you done now?" Vernon demanded, face mottled with anger and fear. "We've had people in uniforms asking questions. Now." Harry froze. "What people?" Vernon jabbed a finger toward the living room window. "People," he said. "Stood there on the pavement like they owned the place. Said they were from—" He spat the word as if it were a slug. "The ministry. Said you were in danger." Harry's stomach tightened. "You are too," he said before he could stop himself. Vernon went even redder. "Don't be ridiculous," he snarled, but his eyes flicked toward the window again, betraying him. Dudley Dursley hovered at the doorway of the kitchen, a great pale lump of boyhood, his eyes wide. "Is it true?" Dudley asked suddenly, voice too small for him. "Mum said, she said there was a murderer after you." Harry looked at Dudley and saw for a moment the child he might have been if his life had been wrapped in soft cushions and denial. Dudley's fear was real. It made Harry almost kind. "Something like that," Harry said. Petunia made a strangled sound. "This is your world," she hissed, and her voice shook. "Your freakish world. We wanted nothing to do with it." "And yet it finds you," Harry said, and the words came out colder than he intended. He dumped his trunk in the cupboard under the stairs out of habit, then stopped. The cupboard door stared at him like an old nightmare. He stood there, hand on the knob, and realized he could choose. He dragged the trunk back out. Vernon opened his mouth to protest. Harry looked at him. Something in Harry's gaze must have made Vernon swallow his words, because the man's lips pressed together, trembling. Harry took his trunk upstairs. His bedroom was exactly as he had left it. Narrow bed, barred window, old school books shoved in a corner like they could contaminate the room by being seen. He set Hedwig on the desk and opened the cage. She flew out and landed on his shoulder, nipping his ear in irritation. Then she settled, warm and real. Harry crossed to the window and pulled the curtain aside. Across the street near Mrs. Figg's house, a man stood with a newspaper. At first glance he looked like any neighbor. Dark coat, sensible shoes, ordinary face. But his eyes were too alert, his posture too controlled. When Harry's gaze met his, the man tilted his head slightly, a subtle nod. Kingsley Shacklebolt die. Harry's chest tightened, half relief, half fury. Protection. Surveillance. The ministry finally cared enough to watch him, but that did not erase the fact that he had been alone too often. A tap sounded on the glass behind him. Harry turned sharply. A small folded scrap of parchment fluttered against the window, held by a bird so tiny it looked like a shadow with wings. It was not an owl. It was a bat-like thing, and Harry's throat went dry. Then he saw the familiar seal. The tiny creature was a ministry messenger, conjured rather than sent. Harry opened the window and it darted in, dropping the parchment into his palm before vanishing like smoke. Harry broke the seal with shaking fingers. Harry James Potter, it read in brisk, official handwriting. You are to remain at your residence until further notice. A representative of the ministry will contact you within the week. You are not to undertake unsanctioned travel. For your protection, and for the protection of others. Signed, Cornelius Oswald Fudge. Harry stared at the signature. The minister's name looked wrong on the page, like someone had forged it. The idea of Cornelius Fudge writing to him as if they were allies felt like a trick. Outside, Kingsley Shacklebolt folded his newspaper and walked away with unhurried steps, as if everything were normal, as if the street were not a line drawn in chalk between Harry and the darkness coming for him. Harry crushed the parchment in his fist, then forced his fingers open. For once, he did not feel entirely alone. Molly Weasley hugged Harry James Potter like she could squeeze the graveyard out of him. It was a fierce, maternal grip, smelling of flour and soap and home. And for a moment, Harry's lungs forgot how to breathe. His face pressed into her shoulder, and the world narrowed to the warmth of her and the creak of the burrow's uneven floorboards. "Oh, you poor dear," Molly Weasley whispered, and her voice wobbled, as if she might break if she said too much. "Oh, Harry." Arthur Weasley stood behind her, one hand on her back, his eyes tired but gentle. "Come in," he said softly, as though any loudness might shatter what fragile peace remained. "You're safe here." Safe. Harry had heard the word too often lately, and it felt like a spell everyone cast out of desperation rather than certainty. Still feels like a spell, he thought, and spells mattered. Ronald Bilious Weasley grabbed Harry's trunk, and the grin he tried to wear was brave and shaky. "Mum's been driving us mad," Ron said. "Every 5 minutes? Is he here yet? Is he here yet?" "Like you're a parcel," she ordered. "Damn." Hermione Jean Granger appeared behind him, breathless from the flu. Her hair frizzed with soot, her eyes sharp with worry and joy. She stepped forward and hugged Harry quickly, awkwardly, as if she wasn't sure what kind of comfort he could bear. "I brought books," Hermione said immediately, as though books were the correct response to murder and resurrection. Her voice trembled anyway. "About protective enchantments, about blood wards, about all sorts." Ron rolled his eyes. "Ugh. Of course you did." In the kitchen, the table was crowded with more than breakfast. Maps lay spread out beside plates of toast. Letters stamped with the ministry seal sat in a pile like weight. A wizarding wireless hissed softly in the corner, muted, as if even the announcer feared his own words. Bill Weasley sat at the table, hair tied back, earrings glinting. His usual easy confidence dulled into something harder. Charlie Weasley leaned against the counter, arms crossed, muscles tense like he expected to wrestle a dragon in the pantry. "The ministry's moving," Bill said, nodding at the letters. "Properly moving. It's odd." "Odd good," Charlie muttered, then glanced at Harry, his expression softening. "You all right, mate?" Harry opened his mouth, then shut it. "How did you answer that?" "I watched someone die. I brought his body back. The man who killed my parents has my blood in his veins." Molly set a plate of eggs in front of him as if feeding him could fix anything. "Hey," she ordered, voice sharp now, because she needed sharpness to hold herself together. "You're skin and bone." Harry took a bite because it was easier than talking. The eggs tasted of salt and panic. Arthur cleared his throat. "We had a visit," he said, and his eyes flicked to the door as if expecting it to open. "From Kingsley Shacklebolt." Harry's stomach tightened. "He was at Privet Drive," Harry said. Arthur nodded. "He'll be in and out. The ministers set up a liaison with Dumbledore. It's unprecedented." Hermione leaned forward, eyes blazing. "It's also sensible," she said. "If they coordinate now, they can stop it," Ron finished, but his voice faltered on the last word. "Stop it. Stop Voldemort." It sounded childish, the way it had when they were 11 and bravery had been a costume you put on and took off after the adventure. Bill's gaze turned grim. "They can shorten it," he said quietly. "That's what they can do." Harry looked down at his plate. He remembered Voldemort's laughter in the graveyard. He remembered the way the Death Eaters had gathered, cloaked and eager, like vultures answering a bell. Shorten it. Not stop. Not undo. A knock sounded at the kitchen door. Everyone froze. Arthur rose, wand in hand. Molly's fingers tightened on the back of a chair. Ron's hand slid under the table toward his own wand. Arthur opened the door. Albus Dumbledore stood on the threshold, rain dripping from his hat, his eyes bright behind his spectacles. He looked impossibly like both a kindly grandfather and a general. "Good morning," Dumbledore said pleasantly, as though he had come for tea rather than war. Then his gaze found Harry. "Harry," he said, and the warmth in the name made Harry's chest ache. "May I come in?" Molly stepped aside as if propelled by reflex. "Of course," she said, and her voice cracked. Dumbledore entered, shaking rain from his cloak. His presence filled the kitchen, not with volume but with gravity. He took a seat at the table, folding his hands. "I will not take much of your time," Dumbledore said, and his eyes swept them all. "But I wish to speak while the opportunity is quiet. The Ministry has accepted what happened. That is, a gift. One we must use quickly." Hermione's face lit with fierce determination. Ron swallowed hard. Bill and Charlie leaned in. Harry sat very still. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, and the question surprised him. In his head, he had been a victim, a witness, a piece on Voldemort's board. But Dumbledore's presence made him feel like a player again. Dumbledore's gaze softened. "To learn," he said simply. "To rest when you can. And to understand that you will be protected, not because you are helpless, but because you are valuable." Harry's scar prickled as if in agreement. "And," Dumbledore added, his voice gentle but unyielding, "you must not be bait." Harry's throat tightened. He nodded once, because he did not trust himself to speak. Outside, the wind rattled the burrow's crooked walls. Inside, the Wesleys gathered closer around the table, as if drawing a circle of warmth against the cold creeping in. Severus Snape apparated into cold so sharp it tasted like metal. The moor stretched out under a moon veiled by clouds, a landscape stripped bare, like bone. Wind tore at his robes, trying to pry him open. He welcomed the pain. It anchored him. The dark mark on his left forearm pulsed faintly, a heartbeat that did not belong to him. Ahead, a small fire burned in a ring of stones, its light thin and weak against the vast night. Figures knelt around it, hooded, bowed, their shadows long and twisted. The smell of damp earth and smoke hung heavy, mingled with something fouler, an undercurrent like rot beneath soil. Snape approached, boots sinking slightly into mud. No one looked up. Their obedience was complete, rehearsed, desperate. Then the air changed, as if the world drew in a breath. Tom Marvell O'Riddle, no Lord Voldemort, stood by the fire as though he had always been there. Pale as a corpse, eyes like fresh blood, his face stretched too tight over his skull. His presence was a pressure on the skin, a cold hand at the nape. Snape dropped to one knee, lowering his head. The movement was precise, practiced. He could perform obedience as well as he could brew poison. "My lord," Severus Snape said. Voldemort's voice was silk dragged over stone. "Severus," he murmured. And Snape felt the attention like a knife sliding between ribs. "You return." "Always," Snape said, and made the word sound like loyalty rather than inevitability. A giggle, high, shivering, came from the circle. Bellatrix Lestrange knelt nearest the fire, her hood thrown back, her eyes shining with devotion so fierce it looked like madness. She stared at Voldemort as if he were the sun. Voldemort's gaze slid to her. "Bella," he said, and there was amusement in the name. "You were quick. I live to serve you," Bellatrix breathed, voice trembling. "Tell me who to kill." Voldemort's thin lips curved. "Soon," he said. Then his gaze snapped back to Snape. "Tell me," he said softly, "what news do you bring?" Snape lifted his head just enough to meet Voldemort's eyes. It took everything in him not to flinch. "The Minister of Magic has accepted the truth," Snape said. He did not embellish. He did not soften. "Cornelius Fudge believes you have returned." A ripple went through the kneeling figures. A hiss of surprise, of anger, of fear. Lucius Malfoy's hood shifted as if he had jerked his head up too quickly, then forced it back down. Voldemort's expression did not change. Only his eyes narrowed slightly, like a snake tasting air. Accepted, Voldemort repeated. Believes. He savored the words as if deciding whether they were poisonous. That is inconvenient. Bellatrix's mouth curled into a smile. Let them come, she whispered. Let them try. Voldemort's gaze slid over the circle. Some of you, he said softly, have been slow. Lucius Malfoy's shoulders stiffened. The mud seemed suddenly deeper around him. My lord, Lucius said quickly, voice smooth even in panic. I have been working. Quiet, Voldemort said, and Lucius's voice snapped off like a candle blown out. Voldemort turned back to Snape. And Dumbledore? He asked, as though the name were a familiar taste. He has the Ministry's ear, Snape said. There is cooperation. Cooperation, Voldemort murmured, and something like genuine irritation flickered across his face. Fudge has grown a spine. His eyes sharpened. Or someone has lent him one. Snape kept his face still. He felt sweat cold under his collar. Voldemort paced slowly around the fire, bare feet silent in mud. This changes nothing, he said lightly. It only changes the speed. We will adapt. He stopped behind Lucius Malfoy. You, he said, and Lucius's breath hitched. You will prove yourself. Yes, my lord, Lucius whispered. Voldemort's gaze lifted, scanning the horizon as if he could see through hills and distance and time. We have lived in shadows for too long, he said. If they wish to drag us into light, then we will show them what light burns. The fire flared suddenly, turning green for a heartbeat, and every kneeling Death Eater flinched as if struck. Snape held his posture, his mind locked down behind layers of discipline. Inside, his heart hammered like a fist against a door. Voldemort's voice softened. Severus, he said, you are still close to Dumbledore. Yes, my lord, Snape said. Voldemort leaned in, and Snape smelled something like cold ash. Then you will tell me everything, Voldemort whispered. Not only what he does, what he feels, what he fears. Nah. Snape lowered his gaze. As you wish. Voldemort straightened, satisfied. Rise, he said. Snape rose, the mud sucking at his boots. The wind howled across the moor. The Death Eaters stayed kneeling, heads bowed, waiting for commands. In the distance, thunder rolled like an oncoming army. Malfoy Manor had been built to make visitors feel small. Its ceilings rose too high, its corridors stretched too long, its silver gleamed too coldly. Lucius Malfoy had always loved that about it. Power should be felt before it was spoken. Tonight, the manor felt like a tomb. Lucius Malfoy stood in the grand hall, the letter in his hand stamped with the Ministry seal. The parchment looked innocent enough, cream-colored, precise, formal. But the wax seal might as well have been blood. Narcissa Malfoy sat on a settee, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. Her face was pale as marble, but her eyes were sharp. She had learned early how to look calm while the world burned. Draco Malfoy hovered near the stairs, pretending to be casual and failing. He had not yet learned how to wear fear like perfume. His fingers worried at the sleeve of his robes, and his eyes darted from his father to the door and back again. This is impossible, Draco said, voice cracking. They can't, father. They can't summon you. Lucius's mouth tightened. They can, he said, and his voice was low. He did not look at Draco. He could not bear to see the boy's panic. It made him feel older than he wanted to be. And they have. Narcissa's gaze flicked to the windows. Rain hammered the glass, streaking it like tears. Lightning flashed, and for a moment the hall glowed blue-white, making every shadow sharp. You said Fudge would never, Narcissa said quietly. There was no accusation in her voice, only the cold edge of fact. Lucius's fingers tightened on the parchment. Fudge is. He searched for the word and found it too late. Terrified, he said. And terror makes men unpredictable. Draco swallowed hard. Is it true? He asked, and the question carried more than politics. Is he really back? Lucius's jaw clenched. In his mind, he saw the Dark Lord's pale face by a fire, saw red eyes looking through him as if his bones were glass. He remembered the cold voice saying slow, and the way the word had promised pain. Yes, Lucius said softly. He's back. Draco's face went even paler. Then we should go, he whispered. Shouldn't we go to him? Like the others. Narcissa's eyes snapped to Draco, and something feral flashed there. No, she said, a single word, sharp as a slap. Lucius turned his head, and for the first time looked at his son properly. Draco looked like a child pretending at adulthood, his fear naked. Lucius felt an unexpected surge of protective rage. This was not what he had wanted for Draco. He had wanted influence, comfort, a life of polished cruelty and safe superiority. He had not wanted his son kneeling in mud for a monster. We will not be reckless, Lucius said carefully. We will be strategic. The truth was, he did not know what strategy meant anymore. The ground had shifted. The ministry was moving. Dumbledore was involved. The old game, bribes and whispers and carefully planted stories, felt suddenly inadequate. A house elf crept into the hall, eyes huge, hands twisting its ragged cloth. Master, it squeaked. Visitors. Lucius's heart hammered. Who? The house elf's ears drooped. Men in black cloaks, master, it whispered. They have wands. Draco made a small sound. Narcissa rose smoothly, her fingers tightening around her wand as if she had already decided she would die rather than let them take her son. Lucius forced his own fear down. This was his house. This was his name. If he showed weakness, he would never reclaim control. Let them in, Lucius said. The doors swung open, and for a heartbeat the storm's roar surged into the hall. Then a line of aurors stepped through, dark cloaks dripping, faces set. At their head walked Rufus Scrimgeour, his eyes like a predator's. Lucius Malfoy, Scrimgeour said, voice carrying through the hall. By order of the Minister of Magic and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, you are to accompany us to the Ministry for questioning. Lucius lifted his chin, schooling his face into aristocratic boredom. On what grounds? He asked smoothly. Scrimgeour's mouth twisted. On the grounds that the world is tired of your lies, he said. He held up a parchment of his own. Warrant for search and seizure. We will also be inspecting your property for illegal artifacts. Lucius felt the floor tilt. Behind his polished mask, panic clawed. Draco took an involuntary step forward, then stopped as Narcissa's hand snapped out and clamped around his wrist like iron. You have no right, Lucius said, and he heard the thinness in his own voice. Scrimgeour's eyes flicked over Narcissa, over Draco, then settled back on Lucius with cold satisfaction. We have every right, he said. The minister believes in nightmares now. The words hit Lucius like a curse. He saw suddenly how this could end. Chains, cells, disgrace. Or worse, Voldemort's attention turned fully on him. Very well, Lucius said, and the word tasted like ash. I will come. As he stepped forward, Draco's eyes met his, wide and pleading. For a moment, Lucius Malfoy felt something crack inside him. He wanted to tell his son that everything would be fine, that power always returned to those who knew how to hold it. But the storm outside did not believe in fine. The interrogation room was small by ministry standards, which meant it felt like a cell. The walls were lined with enchantments that shimmered faintly when touched by wandlight. Chains coiled from the floor like snakes, binding Bartemius Crouch Jr. to a chair bolted into stone. He sat with his head tilted, eyes bright with malicious amusement. Amelia Bones stood at the head of the table with the posture of a judge who had already decided she did not like the defendant. Her legal parchments were stacked neatly, quill poised. Cornelius Fudge sat beside her, his bowler hat on the table like a discarded shield. Sweat shone on his upper lip, and he kept wiping it away as if embarrassed by the proof of his fear. Albus Dumbledore sat opposite Crouch Jr. A pensive rested on the table near him, its silver surface swirling lazily. Rufus Scrimgeour leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Kingsley Shacklebolt stood nearby, face unreadable. "Bartemius Crouch Jr.," Amelia Bones said, voice crisp. "You are accused of the murder of Cedric Diggory, the kidnapping and torture of Alastair Moody, and the conspiracy to assist the return of Lord Voldemort." Crouch Jr. smiled. "So formal," he purred. Amelia Bones's eyes narrowed. "You will answer truthfully," she said. "We are authorized to administer Veritaserum under emergency provisions. Your refusal will be noted." Crouch Jr.'s gaze flicked to the small crystal phial on the table, its contents catching the light like dew. He licked his lips, as if tasting the idea. "You think a potion can defeat devotion?" he asked lightly. Dumbledore spoke, voice gentle. "Barty," he said, "this is not about defeating you. It is about saving others." Crouch Jr.'s smile sharpened. "You always were sentimental," he sneered. Fudge cleared his throat. He began, then had to start again. "We want names," he said, forcing his voice steady. "We want to know who is with him, now." Crouch Jr.'s gaze slid to Fudge with open contempt. "Minister," he murmured, "still clutching your little office like it's a lifeboat." Fudge's cheeks flushed. He looked as if he might shout. Instead, he glanced at Amelia Bones, and she nodded once. Kingsley stepped forward, wand in hand. His movements were precise. He tilted the phial, letting 3 drops fall into Crouch Jr.'s mouth. Crouch Jr. gagged, then swallowed, eyes watering. His smile faltered, then returned. Looser now, as if his face had forgotten how to lie. Amelia Bones's voice was steady. "Describe the ritual," she said. Crouch Jr.'s eyes unfocused slightly, and his voice changed. It was still his, but there was an eerie honesty to it, like hearing a confession whispered in a cathedral. "Bone of the father," he said softly. "Flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy." Wormtail cut his hand. He screamed. He begged. My master rose from the cauldron like a nightmare made flesh. Fudge's fingers clenched on the table edge. "Where?" he demanded. "A graveyard," Crouch Jr. said. "Little Hangleton, Riddle family. It's poetic." Scrimgeour's jaw tightened. Kingsley's eyes sharpened. Amelia Bones dipped her quill. "Names," she said. Crouch Jr.'s lips parted. "Bellatrix Lestrange," he said, and the name fell easily. "Lucius Malfoy Dartai. Peter Pettigrew. Crabbe. Goyle. Not. Dot. Avery Dight. McNair. Travers." He kept going, names spilling out like blood, some known, some less. "Some didn't come," he added suddenly, voice tightening with bitter pleasure. "Some hid. My master will punish them." Fudge's face had gone gray. He looked at Scrimgeour, and for once there was no attempt at charm, only raw need. "Get them," he whispered. Scrimgeour nodded once, grim. "We will," he said. Dumbledore's voice cut in softly. "Barty," he said, "tell us what Voldemort wants." Crouch Jr.'s smile returned, dreamy. "He wants what he always wanted," he murmured. "Power. Fear. Control. But now he wants to do it smarter. Quietly. He wanted the Ministry to deny him. He wanted them to fight you, Dumbledore. He wanted," he frowned slightly, the potion tugging at him. "He wanted the boy isolated, hated, unbelieved. Harry." The thought flickered through the room like a spark. Fudge swallowed hard. "Not now," he said hoarsely, and the words sounded like regret. Amelia Bones' eyes narrowed. "And now?" she asked. Crouch Jr.'s gaze sharpened again, suddenly hungry. "Now he will strike," he said. "He will show them. If they insist on believing, he will make them afraid to believe." May. A chill crawled down Fudge's spine. He had spent years trying to keep fear out of headlines, out of homes, out of his own heart. He had failed. The fear had been waiting anyway, patient as rot. Dumbledore leaned back slightly, and his gaze met Fudge's. There was no blame in it, only urgency. Fudge looked away first. "Continue," Amelia Bones said sharply, quill poised. Outside the room, the ministry hummed and churned like a disturbed hive. Somewhere in the building, owls beat their wings against cages, sensing something in the air. In the small interrogation chamber, Bartemius Crouch Jr. smiled with wet, potion-loosened lips and began to tell them, in detail, exactly how their world was about to burn. The Wizengamot chamber was built for judgment. Its stone seats rose in tiers like an ancient amphitheater, and the torches that burned along the walls made every face flicker, half lit, half shadowed, as if truth were always divided. Cornelius Fudge stood at the central podium with the sensation of being very small in very large clothing. His ministerial robes hung heavy. The chain of office pressed cold against his chest. His hands trembled, and he clasped them together to keep the motion from betraying him. Albus Dumbledore stood beside him, not at the podium but slightly behind, his presence like a pillar. Dumbledore did not need to speak to be heard. The chamber seemed to lean toward him anyway, as though the very stones remembered his voice. Below them, Amelia Bones sat in the front row, her face set. Rufus Scrimgeour stood to one side, arms crossed, eyes scanning the tiers for trouble. Aurors lined the entrance, silent and unyielding. And in the center, under guard, stood Lucius Malfoy. He was chained at the wrists, but he held himself as if the chains were an inconvenience rather than a verdict. His pale hair was still sleek, his robes still fine. His face was composed. Only the tightness around his eyes betrayed anything. Whispers rippled through the Wizengamot. Some were shocked. Some were delighted. Some were furious. A witch with a sharp chin leaned toward her neighbor. "Malfoy in chains," she breathed as if savoring it. A man with a jeweled ring hissed, "This is politics," as if saying the word might cleanse the scene. Fudge cleared his throat. The sound echoed. He could feel 1,000 eyes on him, weighing him, assessing whether he was still the man they had supported because he was safe. He was not safe now. "Members of the Wizengamot," Fudge began, and his voice trembled. He forced it steady by sheer will. "I call this emergency session under the authority granted to the Minister of Magic in times of national crisis." A murmur swept through the chamber. National crisis. The phrase tasted like old fear. Fudge's gaze flicked briefly to Dumbledore. Dumbledore did not nod. He simply watched, calm, patient, like a teacher waiting for a student to finish a difficult sentence. "We have evidence," Fudge continued, "that Lord Voldemort has returned." The chamber erupted. Shouts, gasps, denials. A furious bark of laughter from someone in the back. A woman's sob. The torches seemed to flare as if startled. Fudge's hands clenched harder. He lifted his voice. "I said..." His voice cracked. He swallowed. "I said we have evidence." A wizard in purple robes stood abruptly. "This is madness," he shouted. "Panic-mongering!" Dumbledore. Dumbledore stepped forward then, and the room quieted as if someone had cast a silencing charm. "I understand your fear," Dumbledore said, and his voice, calm and deep, carried easily. "I understand your desire for this to be untrue, but truth is not altered by our discomfort." He gestured slightly, and an auror carried forward a pensieve. The silver surface swirled. "We have testimony from Harry James Potter," Dumbledore said. "We have testimony from Bartemius Crouch Jr., administered under legally supervised Veritaserum." He looked at Amelia Bones, who gave a small nod. "We have physical evidence of the Dark Mark reawakening," And we have a living servant of Voldemort still at large, Peter Pettigrew. The name sent a ripple of confusion through the room. Some recognized it, others did not. But among those who did, faces tightened. A witch in green robes stood. "Pettigrew is dead," she snapped. "Everyone knows." "He is not," Amelia Bones said, and her voice cut like iron. She rose, monocle-like glasses catching torchlight. "We have credible evidence that he survived and has been in hiding. We are pursuing him." The chamber roared again, but the sound was different now. Not only denial. Something else. The frightening shift from disbelief to possibility. Lucius Malfoy lifted his chin. "Minister," he called smoothly. His voice carried. "If you mean to accuse me of treason based on the ravings of a lunatic and the fantasies of a schoolboy." Harry's face flashed in Fudge's mind. Mud under nails. Eyes too old. Fudge turned his gaze to Lucius Malfoy, and for the first time in years, he did not feel cowed by Malfoy's money or influence. He felt only anger. "You are here," Fudge said, voice harsh, "because your home contained dark artifacts, because you have connections to known Death Eaters, because your name was named, and because the Ministry will no longer accept the Imperious Curse as an excuse without proof." Lucius's eyes flashed. For a heartbeat, masks slipped, and there was something like fear there. A wizard in the second tier shouted, "If you know who is back, why aren't we seeing attacks? Why isn't there a dark mark over London?" Dumbledore's gaze lifted. "Because Voldemort is not foolish," he said. "He would prefer we fought among ourselves. That has been his strategy." Fudge felt the weight of the moment like a stone on his chest. This was the bridge over fire. No returning now. "The Ministry will act," Fudge said, voice steadier. "We will coordinate with Hogwarts. We will coordinate with Dumbledore. We will protect our citizens. We will investigate those named. We will not," he swallowed, "we will not pretend." Silence fell, thick and uneasy. Some faces looked relieved. Some looked furious. Some looked calculating, already measuring where their loyalties lay. Lucius Malfoy's eyes met Fudge's. In them was a promise. This would cost. Fudge straightened his shoulders. "Let it," he said softly, and he meant it. Malfoy Manor did not yield its secrets easily. Its walls had been enchanted to resist intrusion, its floors warded to confuse, its air heavy with old spells layered like dust. But horrors came with warrants and purpose was a kind of magic, too. Rufus Scrimgeour moved through the manor like a hunting dog, nostrils flared, eyes sharp. His wand was raised, casting a pale light that slid over carved wood and shadowed alcoves. Aurors fanned out behind him, boots muffled by thick rugs, faces set. Lucius Malfoy walked between two Aurors, chains clinking softly with each step. He had tried to protest. He had tried to charm. He had tried to threaten. None of it had stuck. The Ministry's mood had changed, and Lucius could feel it like a new wind. As they passed the grand hall, Narcissa Malfoy stood at the edge of the staircase, her posture perfect, her face blank, her fingers curled slightly at her side where a wand was hidden in her sleeve. Her eyes followed Lucius with a cold intensity that did not soften into farewell. Draco Malfoy stood behind her, pressed against the wall as if trying to become part of it. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open, breath shallow. When his eyes met his father's, something desperate flickered there. Lucius did not allow himself to look away too quickly. He held Draco's gaze, willing strength into it. "Be a Malfoy," his eyes said. "Be proud. Be calm. Do not show them the shape of your fear." Then an Auror shoved him forward, and the moment broke. In a side corridor, an Auror called out, "Found something!" Scrimgeour turned sharply. He followed the voice into a smaller room. A study lined with books, the air scented with ink and smoke. A shelf had been pulled away, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were objects that made the room feel colder. A black, leather-bound book with no title. A silver mask with a long nose, its surface pitted and ugly. A set of opals that seemed to drink light. A hand-shaped artifact that twitched faintly, as if it remembered being alive. The Auror who had found it looked faintly sick. "Illegal," he murmured. Scrimgeour's mouth tightened. "Bag it," he ordered. "Everything. Mark it. Seal it. Take it." Narcissa appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost. She stared at the objects, expression unreadable. "These are family heirlooms," she said coolly. Scrimgeour looked at her. "So were the things that killed people last time," he said. His eyes flicked briefly toward Draco. Draco flinched as though struck. Narcissa's lips thinned. "You will regret this," she murmured. Scrimgeour's gaze was steady. "Maybe," he said, "but not as much as you will." In another room, a house elf crouched under a table, hands over its ears, eyes huge. It made a small keening sound, like a creature mourning before the death even came. Scrimgeour felt briefly a pang of something like pity. Then he crushed it. Pity was for after. Now was for action. As they moved deeper, more compartments were found. More objects. More proof. Every find felt like another nail driven into the coffin of the polite lies that had held the wizarding world together. Lucius Malfoy's face remained smooth as he was dragged through the corridors, but inside, his mind raced. Voldemort. Punishment. Failure. The Ministry's sudden spine. A storm raged outside, rattling the windows. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat the manor's walls looked like the inside of a skull. Scrimgeour stood in the study, holding the black book between charmed gloves, and looked toward the doorway where Narcissa Malfoy stood like a queen watching her kingdom be stripped. "We're not done," Scrimgeour said. Narcissa's eyes glittered. "Neither are we," she replied softly. In the grand hall, Draco Malfoy swallowed hard and stared at the Aurors moving through his home like invaders. Somewhere deep inside him, a boy's world cracked and something darker began to seep in. The next time Hogwarts gathered for breakfast, the great hall felt like a room full of secrets trying to pretend they were gossip. Owls swooped overhead, wings beating, dropping newspapers and letters onto tables with thuds that sounded louder than usual. The Daily Prophet lay open on several tables, its moving photographs jerking with urgency. The headline in heavy black letters was careful but unmistakable. "Ministry investigates new dark activity." Beneath it, smaller print spoke of raids, of arrests, of renewed vigilance. Harry James Potter stared at the paper as if it might bite him. He had dreamed of the world believing him. Now that belief was ink and public, and it felt heavy rather than freeing. Ronald Bilious Weasley leaned over the paper, mouth tight. "Blimey," he whispered. "They actually did it. They actually went after Malfoy." Hermione Jean Granger's eyes were sharp, scanning every line. "They're not saying Voldemort," she murmured. "Not yet, but they're laying groundwork." At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy sat very still. His face was pale. His eyes were red-rimmed, though whether from lack of sleep or something else, Harry couldn't tell. Draco's fingers gripped his goblet so hard his knuckles were white. Crabbe and Goyle flanked him, looking confused and sullen, like dogs who had sensed their master's fear. Pansy Parkinson whispered something, leaning close, her face half hidden behind her hair. Draco didn't respond. Severus Snape stood behind the Slytherin table, his expression unreadable. He did not touch Draco. He did not acknowledge him. But he was there, a shadow looming, and Harry had the sudden unsettling thought that Snape's presence was the only thing keeping Draco from shattering completely. Minerva McGonagall rose at the high table. Her voice, when she spoke, was controlled but strained. "Students," she said, "there will be changes in the coming term. You will be informed of new security measures. You will behave with maturity. You will not spread rumors that endanger others." A murmur swept through the hall. Rumors were Hogwarts's favorite sport. Asking children not to spread them felt like asking rain not to fall. Harry's stomach twisted. New security. New measures. A new war creeping even into this place. He glanced toward Draco again. Draco's gaze was fixed on the prophet in front of him, as if the letters were wounds. Then Draco looked up, and his eyes met Harry's across the hall. For a heartbeat, something raw passed between them. Fear. Anger. A strange, unwilling understanding. Neither of them had chosen the sides their parents had carved into them. Then Draco's lip curled, mask snapping back into place. He jerked his chin in a gesture of contempt, and the moment was gone. Ron noticed. "What's he looking at you for?" he muttered, hand tightening on his fork. Hermione's voice was quiet. "Because things are changing," she said. "And people like Draco, they don't know what to do when the rules change." Harry swallowed. He thought of Lucius Malfoy in chains. He thought of Voldemort's voice in the graveyard promising punishment. Snape's voice cut through the hall, low but carrying. "Mr. Malfoy," he said, and Draco flinched. Snape leaned down, speaking too softly for others to hear, but Harry watched Draco's face. Whatever Snape said, Draco's jaw tightened. Then he gave a single stiff nod. Snape straightened and let his gaze sweep the hall. For a moment, his eyes met Harry's. There was nothing warm there. Nothing comforting. But there was, unmistakably, warning. Harry looked away, his heart thudding. He did not know whether Snape was warning him about Draco, about Voldemort, or about himself. Above them, an owl dropped a letter onto Harry's plate. The seal was purple wax stamped with the Hogwarts crest. Harry broke it open with fingers that suddenly felt clumsy. Harry James Potter, it read. "Report to the headmaster's office this evening. You will begin instruction." There was no signature, but he did not need one. Harry folded the letter slowly. The taste of eggs turned to ash in his mouth. The great hall buzzed with whispered fear, and the candles burned steadily overhead, as if refusing to acknowledge the darkness pressing at the edges of the castle. They found Peter Pettigrew in a village that smelled of damp hay and secrets. It was not a magical village. No crooked shops, no enchanted lanterns, but the kind of place wizards hid because it was too ordinary for anyone to look closely. The cottages were low and dark, the lanes narrow, the night air thick with mist. Kingsley Shacklebolt moved through the shadows with two aurors behind him, their wands raised, eyes scanning. He had been tracking rumors for days. Rats seen in strange places, whispers of small thefts, a sense of something skittering always just out of sight. A dog barked somewhere, sharp and sudden. Kingsley paused, listening. The bark came again, closer. The sound did not belong to a pet. It belonged to something alarmed by the wrong scent. "There," one of the aurors whispered, pointing. A rat scurried along a stone wall, its body a blur of brown and panic. It darted toward a gap beneath a fence, moving with desperate speed. Kingsley lifted his wand. "Stupefy," he murmured. A flash of red light shot through the mist. The rat veered, impossibly quick, as if it had anticipated the spell. It leapt, landing on a stack of firewood, scrambling upward. "Clever," Kingsley murmured. "Too clever." The rat froze, whiskers twitching. For a heartbeat, the night held its breath. Then the rat's body convulsed. Bones stretched. Fur rippled. The creature bulged and unfolded into a man who hit the ground in a tangle of limbs, filthy and panting. Peter Pettigrew scrambled to his feet, eyes wild, hair lank, his teeth bared in a grimace that was almost a smile. "Please," he squealed, voice high and broken. "Please, I—" One of the aurors surged forward. Pettigrew's hand flashed and moonlight gleamed on silver. His metal fingers curled, and something like a sharp crack of magic snapped through the air. The auror yelped, stumbling back, clutching his arm. Pettigrew bolted. Kingsley moved. "Incarcerus!" he shouted. Ropes of light whipped through the air, snaking toward Pettigrew's legs. Pettigrew twisted, silver hands slicing through one rope as if cutting cloth. He stumbled but kept running, breath coming in ragged sobs. "I didn't want to." Pettigrew shrieked over his shoulder, as if his own confession might save him. "I didn't want to. He made me." "Hey!" "Petrificus totalis," Kingsley said, voice steady. The spell struck Pettigrew squarely in the back. His body went rigid, his arms snapping to his sides. He toppled forward, face first into mud with a wet smack. For a moment, there was only the sound of his muffled whimpering and the distant bark of the dog. Kingsley approached slowly, wand trained on Pettigrew's head. The man lay frozen, cheek pressed into dirt, his eyes wide and frantic. Mud clung to his eyelashes. His silver hand gleamed absurdly clean against the filth. The injured Auror came up beside Kingsley, breathing hard, blood seeping through his sleeve. "Is it him?" he demanded. Kingsley's gaze was cold. "It's him," he said. The second Auror cast a containment charm, chains of light wrapping around Pettigrew's body, pinning him even in his petrified state. Pettigrew's eyes rolled, tears spilling sideways into mud. Kingsley crouched and leaned close enough that Pettigrew could see his face clearly. "Peter Pettigrew," Kingsley said softly. "You are going to the ministry. You will tell the truth." Pettigrew's eyes bulged. A muffled sound forced itself out of his throat, something between a sob and a plea. Kingsley straightened. He felt no satisfaction, only a grim sense of the clock moving. This was one piece of the puzzle, dragged, kicking into light. Behind him, the village lay quiet, unaware that history had just changed in its muddy lane. Mist curled around cottage roofs like smoke. Kingsley raised his wand, sending a Patronus, a bright silver lynx, leaping into the night. "Tell the minister," the lynx said in Kingsley's calm voice, and then it darted away, leaving the air colder in its wake. In the mud, Peter Pettigrew's eyes stared upward, and in them was the terror of a man who had chosen the wrong masters and finally run out of hiding places. Azkaban's cold did not leave a man quickly. It lived in the bones, in the reflexes, in the way Sirius Black's shoulders stayed slightly hunched as if expecting a blow even when no one raised a hand. He stood in a ministry holding room that smelled of parchment and old stone, his hair long and tangled, his face hollowed by years of hunger and darkness. But his eyes, gray and fierce, burned with a life that Azkaban had not managed to extinguish. He held himself upright not because he felt safe, but because he refused to bend. The chains had been removed from his wrists only minutes ago. He kept flexing his fingers as if trying to remember what it felt like to be unbound. Amelia Bones stood across from him, papers in hand. She looked like she had not slept. Her eyes were rimmed with red, but her voice was controlled. "Peter Pettigrew is in custody," Amelia Bones said. "He has given testimony, under veritaserum and in the presence of multiple witnesses." She lifted the parchment. "His confession directly contradicts the evidence used to imprison you." Sirius let out a laugh that sounded like a cough. "You don't say," he rasped. Dumbledore stood in the corner, hands folded, watching Sirius with something like sorrow. "I am sorry," Albus Dumbledore said quietly. "I am sorry it has taken so long." Sirius' gaze snapped to Dumbledore. "Sorry," he echoed, and the word was sharp, bitter, exhausted. "That's a nice word. Doesn't give you back years, does it?" Amelia Bones' mouth tightened. "We can give you back freedom," she said. "And we can clear your name, if you accept the terms." Sirius' lips curled. "Terms," he said, amused in the ugliest way. "Let me guess. Don't leave the country. Don't seek revenge. Don't—" "The ministry will require supervision," Amelia Bones said bluntly. "At least initially. There are political considerations." Sirius' eyes flashed. "Of course there are." The door opened then, and Harry James Potter stumbled in like a thrown spear. He looked thinner than Sirius remembered, older around the eyes. His scar stood out against pale skin. For a heartbeat, he just stood there, staring, as if afraid Sirius might vanish. Sirius' chest tightened painfully. "Harry," he whispered, and his voice broke on the name. Harry crossed the room in 3 steps and crashed into him. The force of the hug was desperate, fierce, as though Harry were trying to confirm with his whole body that Sirius was real. Sirius' arms came up and wrapped around Harry, and for a moment the world narrowed to bone and warmth and the simple miracle of touch. Harry's breath hitched. "I thought," he began, and could not finish. Sirius pressed his face into Harry's hair, breathing him in like air after drowning. His own eyes stung. He had dreamed of Harry in Azkaban's cold, dreamed of a boy growing up alone while Sirius rotted. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. None of the imagined versions had captured how much it would hurt. "I'm here," Sirius said hoarsely. "I'm here." Amelia Bones looked away abruptly, as if the sight were too intimate. Dumbledore's gaze softened, and for a moment he looked old, heavy with all the times he had watched love suffer. Harry pulled back slightly, still gripping Sirius' shoulders. His eyes were bright with tears and anger. "They're saying your name will be cleared," he said, voice shaking. There's going to be a hearing. They believe me." Sirius' mouth twisted. "They believe you now," he said softly. "How generous." Harry flinched, as if the bitterness had struck him. Sirius forced himself to breathe. "It's not your fault," Sirius said quickly, and his fingers tightened on Harry's arms. "None of it is." Harry's face crumpled. "He's back," Harry whispered, and the words were both warning and confession. "Voldemort." Sirius' expression changed. The softness vanished, replaced by something hard and dangerous. "I know," he said. "And now?" He glanced at Amelia Bones, at Dumbledore, at the Aurors watching with cautious respect. "Now we fight properly." Amelia Bones cleared her throat. "Mr. Black," she said, "there will be conditions, there will be supervision. But you will not return to Azkaban. Not if I have any say." Sirius looked at her, then at Harry. A slow smile spread across his face, thin, fierce, alive. "All right," he said. "Let's see how the Ministry likes the truth." Harry let out a shaky laugh through tears. Sirius pulled him close again, and for a heartbeat, the holding room felt less like a cell and more like a doorway. Outside, the Ministry hummed with the machinery of law and war. Inside, a wrongly condemned man held his godson and felt, for the first time in years, something like purpose. Diagon Alley had always felt like a secret made cheerful. Even on gray days, it had a hum of magic, the bright clutter of shops, the chatter of witches comparing cauldrons and gossip. Now it felt like a street bracing for siege. Rain drizzled down, turning cobbles slick. Shopkeepers stood in doorways with arms crossed, eyes scanning. Several windows had been charmed with protective runes that shimmered faintly when the light caught them. A pair of Aurors walked past Flourish and Blots, their cloaks dark, their wands visible. People stepped aside quickly, not out of respect so much as out of fear of being near anything official. Harry James Potter moved through the crowd with Ronald Bilious Wesley and Hermione Jean Granger at his sides. He wore a hood pulled low. It did not hide his scar, not really, but it made him feel less like a target painted in ink. Kingsley Shacklebolt walked a little behind them, dressed plainly, his posture relaxed in a way that was clearly practiced. His eyes, however, missed nothing. Hermione clutched a copy of the Daily Prophet, knuckles white. The headline was larger today, the language less careful. Ministry confirms Voldemort activity, security measures expanded. The name Voldemort was still absent, replaced by euphemism. But everyone could read between the lines now. "They're finally saying it," Ron muttered, reading over Hermione's shoulder. "Well, sort of. They have to be careful," Hermione said, voice tight. "If they panic people too fast." "If..." Ron scoffed, gesturing to the crowd. A woman with a baby was hurriedly entering apothecary supplies, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds. A group of older wizards argued in harsh whispers by the leaky cauldron's entrance. A man with a long beard stared blankly at the paper in his hands as if words could kill him. Harry felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He had wanted this, wanted people to know, to believe. Now that they did, the air tasted of dread. They passed Ollivander's. The shop window was dusty and dark, the bell above the door still. Harry paused, staring at the door. He remembered Ollivander's pale eyes, his careful voice, the way he had spoken about wands as if they were souls. "He's still missing," Hermione murmured, following Harry's gaze. "It's been weeks." Harry's scar prickled faintly, as if the darkness in the world had brushed against him. Kingsley moved up beside them. "Don't linger," he said softly. "Not here." Ron's eyes darted. "Is it that bad?" he whispered. Kingsley's expression remained calm. "It's worse than you think," he said quietly. "And better too." Hermione frowned. "Better?" she repeated. Kingsley's gaze flicked to the oars patrolling. "Because we are not pretending," he said. "Because we are preparing. That makes a difference." "No." Harry swallowed. "Does it?" he asked, unable to keep bitterness from his voice. Kingsley looked at him then, and the calm cracked just enough to show something like understanding. "It does," Kingsley said. "It won't save everyone, but it will save more." They reached Gringotts, and the goblins at the entrance looked sharper than usual, their eyes gleaming in the rain. Wizards queued with tense impatience. The air around the bank felt charged, like a storm building. A man nearby hissed, "Fudge is mad," at a companion. "He's letting Dumbledore run the place." His companion muttered, "Better Dumbledore than you-know-who." Harry's stomach turned at the casualness of it. Better. As if choices were always between horrors. They moved on. A shout erupted near the apothecary. Harry spun, hand already reaching for his wand. It was only an argument. Two witches, one accusing the other of hoarding protective potions. But the way people flinched, the way wands half lifted, showed how thin the world's patience was. Hermione's voice was tight. "This is what they've been protecting us from," she whispered. "Not just Voldemort, the fear." Harry looked at the faces around him, fearful, angry, desperate, and felt something settle in him. The war was not only spells, it was trust, breaking and rebuilding. An owl swooped overhead, dropping leaflets that fluttered like dying leaves. Harry caught one, fingers closing on paper. "Ministry Guidelines for Safety and Reporting," it read. "How to identify suspicious activity. What to do if you see the dark mark." Harry's hands shook slightly. He folded the leaflet and shoved it into his pocket. In the rain-slick alley, oars walked like sentries. Shopkeepers bolted doors. People whispered, and the whispers carried the name they still feared to speak. And somewhere beyond the crowd, beyond the street, beyond the Ministry's reach, Voldemort listened for cracks. The first attack after the Ministry's announcement was not on Diagon Alley, not on the Ministry itself, not on any of the grand symbolic targets people expected. Voldemort had always understood that terror multiplied when it struck the places no one thought mattered. It was a small home at the edge of a forest, tucked behind old trees and brambles, the kind of place where a wizarding family lived quietly, raising children, growing herbs, keeping out of politics. Their wards were old-fashioned and lovingly maintained. They would have held against common thieves. They did not hold against Death Eaters. The night was wet, wind shoving rain through branches like thrown stones. Hooded figures appeared at the edge of the property like shadows given shape. Their wands lifted, and spells flew. Green light that killed, red light that shattered, blue light that set wood hissing and smoking. Inside, a woman screamed as glass exploded inward. A man shouted a protective charm, voice raw, as he dragged a child behind him. The air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning enchantment. Then the sky above the house darkened, as if the clouds themselves had been bruised. A skull formed in the air, green, glowing, and obscene, its mouth gaping. A serpent slid from it like a tongue. The dark mark. It hung above the roof like a proclamation. "Run!" the man shouted, pushing his child toward the back door. The child stumbled, crying, clutching a stuffed Kneasel. A curse slammed into the front wall, and the house shuddered, timber groaning as if in pain. The woman fell, blood on her temple. The man's wand shook in his hand. Outside, a Death Eater laughed, a low, delighted sound. Then the air cracked. Aurors apparated into the yard, 3 of them in a tight formation, wands up, shields already flaring. Their cloaks snapped in the wind. Their faces were hard with practiced urgency. Kingsley Shacklebolt appeared among them, his wand raised, and for a moment the spelllight caught his face, making him look carved from resolve. "Hold!" Kingsley shouted, voice carrying over the storm. "Drop your wands!" A Death Eater turned, mask gleaming in green light. Too late, the Death Eater hissed. Spells collided. Red and blue shields flared, sparks exploding into rain. Kingsley moved with smooth precision, deflecting a curse that would have torn through his chest. His counterspell slammed into the Death Eater's shoulder, sending the figure staggering back into mud. Another Death Eater raised a wand toward the house. Kingsley's voice snapped. "Protego Maxima!" he shouted. A shimmering barrier sprang up, wrapping the house in a faint glow. A curse splashed against it like acid, sizzling, sliding off. Inside, the man with the child stared at the sudden light, eyes wide. An Auror shouted, "Family inside!" and sprinted toward the back door under shield cover. Kingsley's duel tightened. The masked figure he faced was quick, vicious. Their wand work was practiced, brutal. Kingsley recognized that kind of movement, someone who had killed before and enjoyed it. "You've got the Ministry's attention now," Kingsley said, voice low between spells. The Death Eater laughed. "That's what we wanted," came the muffled reply. A curse flew toward Kingsley's head. He ducked, felt heat singe his hair. He fired back with a binding spell that wrapped around the Death Eater's legs, but the figure slashed it apart with a violent counter. Behind them the Aurors fought, shields holding, spells cracking through rain. The forest's edge lit up with bursts of color, turning wet leaves into mirrors. Inside the house, the woman sobbed, clutching her head. The child whimpered. The man's wand hand trembled. Then a Death Eater's curse slipped through a gap in an Auror's shield and slammed into the ground near the back door. The earth exploded, sending dirt and stone flying. The Auror staggered. Kingsley's eyes flashed. He moved, casting a shield over the fallen Auror, then spun back, wand snapping up. "Expelliarmus!" Kingsley shouted. The Death Eater's wand flew from their hand, spinning into mud. For a heartbeat, the masked figure froze, startled by the simplicity of the spell. Kingsley's voice was cold. "Stupefy." The Death Eater collapsed, body thudding into wet grass. Another Death Eater hissed, and a curse flew toward the fallen figure as if to silence them forever. Kingsley's shield flared, absorbing it. The remaining Death Eaters hesitated. More cracks sounded as additional Aurors apparated in, summoned by Kingsley's signal. The yard filled with Ministry cloaks, with shields, with the sudden mass of opposition. The Death Eaters retreated, not fleeing in panic, but slipping away like smoke, their laughter carried on the wind. They left the dark mark hanging in the sky for a long moment longer, as if savoring the sight. Kingsley stood in the mud, rain running down his face, breathing hard. The captured Death Eater lay unconscious at his feet, mask tilted, mouth hidden. The family's front door creaked open. The man stepped out, child pressed to his side, eyes huge. He stared at the dark mark overhead, then at the Aurors. "Are we safe?" he asked, voice breaking. Kingsley looked up at the glowing skull. He lifted his wand and cast a spell that tore the mark apart like smoke. Green light dispersed into the rain, fading. "As safe as we can make you," Kingsley said quietly. The man swallowed, tears mixing with rain. "Thank you," he whispered. Kingsley did not feel thanked. He felt only the grinding reality of what Voldemort had done. He had struck, and the Ministry had answered, and the world had seen the dark mark in the sky. No more pretending. The war had written its first public sentence. The new class was not called Defense Against the Dark Arts. That title had become almost comical, cursed by bad luck, by rotating incompetence, by the Ministry's old desire to pretend the dark arts were an academic subject rather than a living, breathing threat. Dumbledore called it practical defensive magic. Alastor Moody called it what you should been learning all along. The classroom smelled of sweat and scorched wood. Practice dummies stood along the walls, their surfaces charred from repeated curses. The windows had been reinforced with wards that shimmered faintly in the pale light. Torches burned even in daytime, as if the castle itself had decided shadows were untrustworthy. Harry James Potter stood with wand raised, facing a dummy that had been enchanted to move unpredictably. It jerked and lunged, wooden arms swinging. Moody's magical eye rolled, tracking everything at once. "Again!" Moody barked. "Shield up, Potter. Don't think, do." Harry's heart hammered. He lifted his wand, casting Protego. The shield flared, a translucent barrier that rippled as the dummy's enchanted fist slammed into it. The impact jarred his arm, sending a dull ache through the bandage. "Better," Moody growled. "Now counter." Harry's mind flashed to the graveyard. Voldemort's wand, the green light, Cedric falling. Anger surged, hot and sharp. Harry snapped his wand up. "Stupefy." Red light shot out, hitting the dummy squarely. It froze, then toppled backward with a thud. Harry exhaled hard, breath steaming slightly in the cool air. Ronald Bilious Weasley let out a low whistle. "Nice," he said, then immediately yelped as his own dummy lunged. "Oi protego!" Ron shouted, barely managing a shield before the dummy clipped his shoulder. He stumbled, swearing. Hermione Jean Granger moved with fierce precision. Her shield snapped up cleanly, her counterspell sharp. She did not flinch when her dummy swung. She anticipated, sidestepping, then disarming it with a crisp Expelliarmus that sent its wooden wand clattering. Moody watched her approvingly. "Granger's got brains," he barked. "Use yours, Weasley." Ron scowled, rubbing his shoulder. "I am," he snapped, then ducked another swing. Minerva McGonagall stood near the door, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She watched the students with the look of a woman who had spent a lifetime believing in education, and now realized education might not be enough. Harry wiped sweat from his brow, fingers shaking slightly. His scar prickled faintly. Not pain, not exactly, but a sensation like distant pressure. Moody's gaze snapped to him. "You feeling that?" he demanded. Harry froze. "What?" Moody jerked his head toward Harry's forehead. "The scar," he said. "You get a twinge. You tell someone. You don't try to be a hero all alone." Harry's throat tightened. "I'm not," he began. Moody's wooden leg thumped closer. His magical eye whirred, fixing Harry with an unsettling intensity. "You are," Moody said flatly. "You mean to be. Doesn't matter. He's marked you, Potter. You're a piece on his board. We keep you alive by being smart." Harry's stomach twisted. He hated being a piece. He hated being watched. But he could not forget the graveyard. He could not forget how easily he had been trapped. Hermione's voice was soft, almost pleading. "We're learning," she said to Harry, as if reminding him of something important. "We're not alone." Harry looked at her, at Ron, at the sweat on their faces, the determination. He swallowed hard and nodded once. "Pair up!" Moody barked suddenly. "Real opponents now. Shields up. No cheap shots, unless you can get away with it. That's the point." "And I'm Sarah. Go. Gondor. Doi. Dun. Danonwa. V. That's the point." The students shuffled, nervous and excited. Harry found himself facing Ron. Ron grinned nervously. "Don't go easy on me," Ron said. Harry's mouth twitched. I won't. They raised their wands. Begin! Moody shouted. Harry moved first, casting a quick disarming charm. Ron blocked, his shield flaring clumsily. Ron fired back a stunner that Harry dodged, spell sizzling past his ear and scorching the wall. Hermione faced another student, her movements quick, her eyes focused. She looked like a girl in a book about war, except she was real, and the war was real too. The room filled with light and sound, spells cracking, shields flaring, Moody shouting corrections. For a moment, the fear in Harry's chest shifted into something else. Not hope, exactly. Not comfort. Readiness. When Moody finally called a halt, the students stood panting, faces flushed, hands trembling. Harry's arm ached. His scar still prickled faintly, like a reminder. Moody paced before them, magical eye rolling. "You're not children playing," he growled. "Not anymore. You're targets. You'll be hunted. And if you want to live, you'll learn to fight." Silence fell, thick as smoke. Harry looked down at his wand, at the thin piece of wood that felt like both weapon and lifeline. He thought of Cedric. He thought of Sirius. He thought of Voldemort's voice promising that this time would be different. Harry lifted his chin. "Again tomorrow?" Ron whispered, half horrified, half eager. Harry nodded. "Again tomorrow," he said, and meant it. The Department of Mysteries did not feel like part of the Ministry. It felt like a place built beneath the Ministry to contain what the Ministry could not understand. Its corridors were colder. The air tasted faintly of dust, and something sharper, like old lightning. The walls seemed to absorb sound. Even the light from wand tips looked hesitant here, as if unsure what it was allowed to illuminate. Albus Dumbledore walked at the front of the group with Amelia Bones beside him, their wands out. Aurors flanked them, faces tense. Kingsley Shacklebolt moved with quiet readiness, eyes scanning the darkness between doors. They had received intelligence, fragmented, hurried, of Death Eater interest in the department. In the old world before belief, such intelligence would have been filed, debated, delayed. Now it had been acted upon in hours. The Hall of Prophecy stretched out before them like a cathedral of glass. Shelves rose into darkness, each one lined with orbs that glowed faintly from within. They hummed softly, a sound like distant whispers held in bottles. Harry James Potter had never been here. He wasn't supposed to be. That was the point of belief. Adults doing what adults should have done. And yet, as Dumbledore stepped into the hall, Harry's name felt carved into the air. It was there in the whispers, in the faint tug at the back of Dumbledore's mind, in the knowledge that some fates, once spoken, could not be unsaid. A sound cut through the hush, a sharp crack like a bone snapping. Then, another. Wands lifted instantly. Aurors fanned out. Amelia Bones' jaw clenched. From the shadows between shelves, cloaked figures appeared, moving fast and silent. Masks gleamed in wandlight. The air filled with the sharp scent of apparition and cold intent. Bellatrix Lestrange stepped forward like a blade drawn from a sheath. Her eyes were wild, her smile ecstatic. "Dumbledore," she purred, voice echoing. "How lovely." "Bellatrix," Dumbledore said calmly, as though greeting an unpleasant acquaintance at a party. His wand was steady. Bellatrix's gaze flicked to Amelia Bones, then to Kingsley, then over the Aurors. She laughed softly. "Oh, they believe now," she breathed. "How adorable." A Death Eater raised a wand, aiming not at the Aurors, but at the shelves. "Stop!" Amelia Bones shouted. The curse hit an orb. Glass shattered, and the hall filled instantly with whispers. Not sound, exactly, but voices brushing through skin and thought. Fragments of prophecy spilled like smoke. The air seemed to thicken with half-heard words, with futures that were never meant to be released. Aurors shouted, shields flaring. Spells exploded in bursts of color that reflected off glass, turning the hall into a storm of light. Orbs shattered, rolling, breaking, spilling their murmured secrets. Kingsley moved toward Bellatrix, wand snapping up. Stupefy. Bellatrix spun, deflecting easily. She laughed, eyes alight. Try harder, she sang. Dumbledore raised his wand and cast a spell that did not flash brightly but seemed to bend space, forming a barrier around the nearest shelves. A shimmering curtain fell, muffling the whispers, protecting the orbs behind it. Bellatrix's smile sharpened. Protecting them? She taunted. Or protecting him? She flicked her wand toward an orb on a shelf, one labeled, faintly, with a name. Albus Dumbledore moved faster than any man his age should. His spell caught the curse midair, twisting it aside. The curse slammed into a shelf instead, glass exploding outward. Voices spilled, and either must die at the hand of the other. Amelia Bones flinched, eyes narrowing. Dumbledore's face did not change, but his eyes hardened. Bellatrix's laughter turned shriller. There it is, she hissed. There's your precious prophecy, and you thought you could keep it safe. A Death Eater lunged toward the protected section, hands outstretched. An Auror slammed into him, tackling him to the ground. They rolled, struggling, wands snapping, spells firing point blank. Kingsley dueled two Death Eaters at once, his movements fluid, controlled. He disarmed one with a sharp twist of his wand, then shielded against a killing curse that would have taken his head. The curse splashed against his shield like acid, sizzling. Dumbledore faced Bellatrix directly now. Their spells collided in midair, crackling. Bellatrix's face was radiant with joy. Dumbledore's was grim. Where is he? Dumbledore asked quietly, between spells. Bellatrix's eyes glittered. Everywhere, she breathed. In our blood. In our fear. In the cracks in your ministry. A sudden movement at the hall's entrance made several Aurors turn. Severus Snape stepped out of the shadows like a man who had been poured from them. His wand was raised, his eyes cold. He had arrived without fanfare, without announcement, simply present. Bellatrix's eyes snapped to him and her smile widened. Severus, she cooed. Come to play. Snape's voice was low. Leave, he said to Bellatrix, and there was something in the word that made even her pause. Bellatrix laughed. Or what? She whispered. Snape raised his wand, and for a heartbeat the air around Bellatrix seemed to tighten, as if the hall itself held its breath. Bellatrix's eyes gleamed. Then a Death Eater shouted, Now! And several cloaked figures hurled curses toward the protected shelf at once, as if willing to overwhelm Dumbledore's barrier with sheer violence. Dumbledore's wand moved in a precise arc. The barrier flared, bright as a shield of sunlight, absorbing the curses. The impact shook the hall. Glass rattled. Whispers screamed. Amelia Bones shouted orders, Aurors responding with disciplined movement, driving Death Eaters back, forcing them away from the shelves. Bellatrix's laughter turned to frustration. Cowards! She spat at her own side, as if angry they were failing to seize the prize. Then abruptly she threw her head back and screamed a spell that sounded like tearing cloth. The air rippled. A dark doorway opened in the shadows between shelves, an escape route carved by dark magic. Come, Bellatrix hissed. One by one, Death Eaters slipped into the rippling darkness, retreating like rats when the trap snapped shut. Aurors tried to pursue, but the doorway collapsed like smoke, leaving only cold air and the echo of whispers. The hall was a mess of shattered orbs and spilled prophecies, glass glittering like ice on the floor. Aurors stood panting, faces grim. Kingsley lowered his wand slowly. Amelia Bones's jaw was clenched so hard it looked painful. Dumbledore stood in the center, wand still raised, eyes scanning the shelves as if counting what had been lost. Snape's gaze flicked to Dumbledore, then away, as though acknowledging without words that Voldemort had made his move. Not a full assault. Not a victory. A test. A message. Even in the Ministry's deepest secrets, the Dark Lord could reach. Amelia Bones stepped carefully around glass shards. "They were after the prophecy," she said, voice tight. Dumbledore nodded. "Yes," he said softly. "And they wanted us to know it." Kingsley's voice was low. "They're escalating," he said. Dumbledore looked up at the endless shelves, at the orbs still glowing faintly in darkness. "They always were," he replied. "We have simply stopped looking away." Cornelius Fudge's office had always been designed to soothe him. The green walls, the tidy shelves, the soft carpet, the whole room was a charm against chaos. Tonight, the charm had failed. The bowler hat sat on the desk, slightly askew, like a piece of him that had been knocked loose. Papers lay scattered in a way he would normally have found intolerable. One report had an inky smear across it where his hand had trembled. Fudge sat behind his desk with his hands clasped so tightly his fingers ached. Amelia Bones stood to his right, reading through a statement with a grim set to her mouth. Rufus Scrimgeour stood near the fireplace, face lined with exhaustion, looking like a man who had fought all night and already knew he would fight again tomorrow. Albus Dumbledore stood by the window. He did not sit. He never seemed to need comfort. He looked out at the foggy glow of London beyond the glass, his silhouette calm and immovable. On a tray near the desk, someone had placed several shattered prophecy orbs. Their glass fragments glittered in candlelight. Even broken, they seemed to hum faintly, as if their whispers clung stubbornly to the world. "They breached the department," Scrimgeour said, voice low. "Not fully. They got in, caused damage, then pulled out. But it's a message." Fudge swallowed hard. "They were inside my ministry," he said hoarsely. Inside the one place that was supposed to be safe." Dumbledore turned from the window. His eyes were tired. "No place is safe," he said quietly. "Only safer than others." Fudge's throat tightened. "The public will panic," he said. "They'll say I've lost control." Amelia Bones' eyes narrowed. "You never had control," she said bluntly. Then she softened, slightly. "No minister does. But you can choose how you respond." Fudge stared at the shattered orbs. He thought of Cedric Diggory's still face. He thought of Peter Pettigrew's mud-smeared terror. He thought of Sirius Black's hollow cheeks and fierce eyes. He thought of the dark mark burning over a small house, and the way that family had looked at Kingsley as if he were salvation. He thought, too, of himself, of the years he had spent smoothing, soothing, delaying. He had always believed fear could be kept at bay by refusing to name it. Now fear had a name, and it had walked into his building. "What did they take?" Fudge asked, voice small. Dumbledore's gaze held him. "They did not take the prophecy," he said. "Not this time." Scrimgeour grunted. "We captured one," he said. "Unconscious, masked. We're holding them in a secure cell. They'll be questioned." Fudge nodded mechanically. "Questioned. Interrogated. Warrants. Arrests. The machinery of law. It felt both reassuring and absurd against the scale of Voldemort's ambition. Amelia Bones tapped her parchment. "We need to issue a public statement," she said. "We need to acknowledge the breach without detailing sensitive information. We need to announce additional protections. And we need to protect Hogwarts," Fudge blurted, words spilling out. "If they can get into the department, if they can." He swallowed, forcing himself to breathe. "Hogwarts is full of children." Dumbledore's eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, Fudge saw something in them that was almost gratitude. "Yes," Dumbledore said quietly. "We do." Fudge looked down at his hands. They were trembling again. He forced them still. "I believed," he said, and his voice cracked. "I believed, and I thought, Merlin helped me. I thought that would be the hard part." Scrimgeour's mouth twisted. "Belief is the beginning," he said. "Now comes the work." Fudge lifted his gaze to Dumbledore. "Tell me what to do," he said, and the words were both surrender and relief. Dumbledore did not smile. "You already know," he said gently. "You do what a leader must do. You tell the truth as much as you can. You act quickly. You protect the vulnerable, and you accept that you cannot protect everyone." Fudge flinched. The last part was the cruelest. Amelia Bones's voice softened, just slightly. "But you can protect more," she said. "Because you are not denying." Fudge swallowed hard. He looked at the shattered prophecy orbs, at the broken glass that had once held fate in neat spheres. He looked at the candle burning low, its flame stubborn. Outside, London's fog pressed against the window like a pale ghost. Somewhere in that fog, ordinary people lived their ordinary lives, unaware of how close darkness had come. Fudge took a deep breath. It felt like swallowing fire. "All right," he said, and this time the words did not surprise him. They felt like a decision hammered into shape. "Draft a statement. Increase security. Move Aurors to Hogwarts. Put protection on vulnerable families. And—" his gaze flicked to the papers with names, to the list of suspects, to the reopened cases. "And we keep hunting." Scrimgeour nodded once, approving. Amelia Bones dipped her quill. Dumbledore's gaze rested on Fudge with quiet intensity. For the first time in his career, Cornelius Oswald Fudge did not feel like a man performing leadership. He felt like a man being forced into it by the weight of the dead. The candle guttered, then steadied. Fudge leaned forward and signed his name at the bottom of a new order, the ink dark and final. Outside, the night did not lighten. But somewhere, far beyond the ministry's walls, the war had learned that the Minister of Magic would no longer look away.